Hi, and welcome to the Learn Kubernetes with Google series. My name is Laura, and I'm a software engineer at Google working on managed multi-cluster in GKE. You may have seen the earlier video in this series, introducing multi-cluster services. In this video, I want to introduce the building blocks of the MCS API, specifically service exports and service imports. Multi-cluster services are introduced in a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, KEP 1645 Multi-Cluster Services API. So that's what you see rendered in GitHub on here. Any implementation that wants to follow the standard for multi-cluster services must follow everything in this KEP. So GKE is one of those, but there are others too. And scrolling down a bit, we can see that there's tons of info in here. And what I want to show you today is how two of the most important API building blocks of the MCS API, service exports and service imports, look like and how they work. So those are up here, exporting services, importing services. So I'm going to show you how those work today. So let's start here with a regular old Kubernetes service. So this is just a normal service. It has the name yellow and the namespace prod. You can see on the left here. But otherwise, it's a pretty standard cluster IP service. And this yellow lined in kind of circle here is going to represent the service in my diagrams later, right? So let's say that this service, we can see in the purple cluster, it's deployed in the purple cluster and has all these yellow pods backing it. So any other pod in the purple cluster, like these little red ones over there, they can access any of these yellow pods using the service's cluster IP. That's how cluster IP services work normally. It allows for pod-to-pod communication within a single cluster to the pods backing a service using that single VIP. And you can also use DNS instead of the VIP, like yellow.prod.svc.cluster.local, which just points to that single VIP. But our situation is, what if we wanted these pods over in the green cluster to be able to contact the yellow pods over in the purple cluster? So first, quick bit of terminology. When both of these clusters are part of the same MCS installation, we call them a cluster set. So this means that they meet some minimal requirements that are in the MCS API KEP for namespace sameness and awareness of each other. And the important part is that together, these clusters are referred to as a cluster set. So for any cluster set using the MCS API, you can publish the cluster IP service, this yellow cluster IP service, to your other clusters by creating a new instance of the service export CRD, represented here by this little flag. So the service export needs to have the same name and namespace as the service you want to turn into a multi-cluster service. When the controller for the MCS API sees that custom service export resource, it knows to start the process so that the service in the purple cluster right now can be accessible from any other cluster in the cluster set. So in our situation, that's this green cluster over here. So you can think of it kind of like a marker or flag indicating that this service in the purple cluster should be published to the rest of the cluster set. So the controller makes a new resource over in the consuming cluster called a service import. This holds all the necessary metadata for the yellow prod service, but is stored in the consuming cluster. One important thing here is that it knows the cluster set IP. That's the one VIP that should be routable to any backend pods for the yellow prod service, no matter what cluster they're in. The controller uses the service import object and what it knows about backends in the producing cluster to create an endpoint slice object in the consuming cluster too. So the IPs stored in this endpoint slice are ones that can reach to the backends of the service back over in the producing cluster. So in this specific case, this endpoint slice in the green cluster would have IPs that are routable to the yellow pods over in the purple cluster. So this is where all the connectivity starts to work. Once we've associated a VIP with the service import and the pod IPs to the endpoint slice object over in the green cluster, then the green cluster knows everything that it needs to know. And you can use this VIP just like any other cluster IP VIP you've used in normal single cluster networking cases. And you can inspect this endpoint slice object if you want to see what endpoints are backing it. But it doesn't matter what cluster in the cluster set they're in because they've been imported into the green cluster. So the service export and the service import, it feels like they're kind of two sides of the same coin. You can see that the service export and service import objects act kind of like a bridge between the service itself in the producing cluster and all the endpoint slices from all clusters that can be consumed in the consuming cluster. So these two new CRDs, service export and service import, are what make it possible for the MCS API controller to connect the existing Kubernetes primitives of services and endpoint slices together into this multi-cluster case. And it doesn't have to be just these two. We could get this blue cluster involved too. And if it also has this service and some pods backing it and exports it as well, this yellow prod service, then those backends would also be accessible from the green cluster because the controller will import all the metadata necessary to consume the blue cluster's endpoints too. And to be even more precise, actually, these could be imported everywhere as long as there's a matching namespace that exists in all clusters. But you can see that makes my diagram kind of hard to read, so we will leave that alone for now. But to round this out, we'll take a quick look at what these custom resources actually look like. So here's the service export YAML itself. This is what you would actually create on the producing cluster to signal that you want to mark a service to be exported to other clusters in the cluster set. So the CRD is very simple, just name, namespace. And again, this name and namespace needs to match the service that it's exporting. So in our case, the service name is yellow, the service namespace is prod, so the service export's name is yellow, and the service export's namespace is prod as well. So I'm going to switch to my terminal real quick, actually, because I want to give you a quick look at what that service export looks like when it's actually deployed in the cluster. So I've got two GKA clusters running MCS over here, and one of them is called GK1. And that's the one that's exporting the service that we've been talking about, this yellow prod service, name yellow and namespace prod. So I'm going to get the service exports in here. The one that I want is the one that has the name yellow. It's in the namespace prod, and I'm going to output this as YAML so we can see. So we see here a bunch of other metadata that gets attached to this as well. For its status, for example, status conditions. But we can see in here, its namespace is prod, its name is yellow, right? And this is our service export object here. I did explicitly want to get this one, right? So we can see that same name and namespace we said, otherwise it's just status metadata from the controller. So the other thing I want to show you is to look at the service import on the other side. So remember, for service imports, the controller makes this one for you. So the MCS controller is in charge of working out the networking between the two clusters, assigning a routable IP between them, but it's interesting to see what it looks like anyways. So let's check out what's in GK2 here. I want to get service imports, the one named yellow in the prod space, and again, I'm going to output YAML. So the point of the service import CRD in general is to have all the information necessary from the original service and from the networking stack so that the consuming cluster can consume it. So it needs to know some metadata from the original service, like the ports it's exposing and what protocol they're on. And it also needs to know the VIP that those backends are routable from on this cluster. So here we can see that it's associated with this cluster set IP, this 1068.9.22. And that is the VIP that can route to those yellow pods in the purple cluster. You could use this to access those pods, or you could use the multi-cluster DNS name, but I don't have time to get into that in this video, so I'll have to save it for the next one. All right, so that's it. Those are the main objects of the MCS API, the service export and the service import connecting services and endpoint slices from the normal core Kubernetes API. That's it for this one. Thank you for joining Learn Kubernetes with Google, and check out the next episode on this topic, Multi-Cluster Services API, Multi-Cluster DNS.